other historical writings, the prophetic biographies have not been immune to alterations. Since the very first years of the emergence of Islam, a number of Muslim scribes were assigned to carefully write down the verses that the Prophet of Islam had received during his revelations. On the one hand, the life of the Prophet was considered a noble one by God, and the Quran recommended strongly that every Muslim aspire to live like him. On the other hand, the people of the Arab Peninsula were very much attracted by the nobility of conduct and the manners of the Prophet. Therefore, it became common among the Muslims to narrate the everyday events of the Prophet in detail in many cases. The manuscripts containing those writings were later called Al-Sira, or Prophetic Biography. After the Prophet of Islam passed away, the Muslims had to refer to these sources to continue learning and benefiting from the genuine Islam: the Quran, the people closest to the Prophet, and the Prophetic Biographies. The Quran was assumed to be sacred and was respected highly from the start. It was very well protected, and no one could have managed to alter it. Many of the affairs and general judgments in this new religion were mentioned in the Quran. But to find out about the details and get a thorough explanation, one had no choice but to refer to the narratives and the Sira. However, events that occurred after the Prophet of Islam passed away resulted in the dispersion of the Muslims. Gradually, misperceptions, manipulations, and personal taste found their way into the historical writings of the early Islam era. For years, the Muslims were forbidden to narrate any of the Prophet's sayings, let alone write them in the form of historical documents. The first book that contained the Prophet's biography and information about his social and personal conduct was written by Urwat ibn Zubayr in the late 1st century lunar calendar. Gradually, different authors, each having different motives, started writing biographies of the Prophet of Islam. Some aimed to merely gather and convey information that was often narrated by the close companions of the Prophet. But sometimes there would be a great contradiction in those written biographies between what was written in them and what a right-minded person would expect to see from the Prophet. This was particularly evident for historians such as Muhammad ibn Tabari and Zainuddin Iraqi, who have acknowledged that they are not certain of the authenticity of all the contents of their books. Now that more than 1400 years have passed, when we consult the legacy of the past and go through the biographies, we encounter information that is contradictory to the verses of the Quran and the sacred image we know of the Prophet of God. It is quite clear that these false records have been inserted into the biographies by the people who wanted to sabotage the truth. Why? The reason can be traced through the reality that after the dispersion of the Muslims, the two most prominent things they still had in common were the Quran and the Prophet. The content of the Quran was the same for all sects of Islam, so nobody could have altered it. Therefore, the only way to authorize the tyranny of the rulers and make such tyranny look like it is something inherent in Islam was to sabotage the biographies. The oppressive regimes had a motive strong enough to bribe some individuals who were contemporaries with the Prophet of Islam and who claimed to be narrators of his conduct and values. These corrupted biographers wrote books with narratives that were hardly a few years old, contrary to their claim that they belonged to the Prophet. In addition, even the biographies that were authentic did not remain immune from the alterations and falsifications. In some cases, the sect of the writers, their affinity with a certain tribal race, their geographic positions, and their place of birth and living were influential in how they depicted the events. For example, in Mecca and Medina, the seminaries were inclined to retell the version of the biographies and the history writings that were narrated by the first and the second caliphs that ruled after the Prophet of Islam passed away. In Iraq, the religious leaders used the versions in line with Ahlul Bayt, certain the most revered family members of the Prophet. And in Syria, the authorities deemed right the narrations of the Umayyad Caliphate. Just like other historical writings, the prophetic biographies have not been immune to alterations. The criterion for authenticity of every historical writing about the Prophet of Islam despite its being attributed to a reliable source, even the Prophet himself, is that it has to be compatible with the Quran and the wisdom. The recognition of authentic narratives requires consultation with experts in this field. Becoming familiar with the lenient basis of Islam and its teachings about love, forgiveness, and respect can shed light on the truth for whoever seeks it. It gives seekers the understanding as to what is and what is not compatible with genuine Islam. With the goal of helping that familiarization be made easier and more accessible, we provide our audiences with the fundamental principles and spirit of Islam, hoping that one day the distortions and misinterpretations of this beautiful, loving religion will be eradicated.